It may not be the biggest or the best-selling first-person shooter series of all time, but Wolfenstein holds a very bloody and special place in the hearts of its fans, even helping to shape the genre as we know it today. Set in and around the events of World War II, the franchise has evolved from simplistic stealth titles that saw players performing a sneaky escape from a Nazi fortress or trying to blow up Hitler with a bomb, to a series of games that offers a bleak look into a world where the Axis powers won the war with the help of the supernatural. That's just cheating if you ask me.
Initially developed by Muse Software and then eventually taken over by Doom giants id Software after Muse went bankrupt, Wolfenstein has become a staple of the gaming landscape, with each new release eagerly anticipated by those with a hunger for blasting fascists with big guns. The games have varied wildly in terms of quality over the years, and while some have been called the best games of all time, others haven't been quite as successful. But which Nazi blasting adventures are the best, and which are sehr, sehr schlecht? That's German for very, very bad, in case you didn't know.
For today's ranked list, we've taken a look back through gaming history, gathered up every title with the word Wolfenstein attached to it, and sorted them all from not great to pretty damned good. In order to determine the position of each entry, we've taken into consideration the game's critical receptions, sales figures, impact on the industry, and just a dash of our own personal opinions.
Even though the series has been around for over 40 years, there aren't that many Wolfenstein games out there, and as such, we've decided to include not just the console and PC titles, but the mobile ones as well.
Everybody happy with all of that? Then let's rank 'em. I'm Ben.
And I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here is every Wolfenstein video game ranked from worst to best.
Number 13, Wolfenstein Cyberpilot, 2019, PS4 and PC. Oh, it's never a good sign when a series' most recent game lands at the bottom of a list like this, but unfortunately for old Wolfie, that's exactly what's happened here. Wolfenstein Cyberpilot was developed by Arcane Leon and Machine Games and published by Bethesda in 2019. Set between the events of the New Colossus and Youngblood, the game sees players step into the light-up shoes of a World War II hacker and charges them with taking controls of the various Nazi war machines that dominate the conflict. Now, to clarify, these events may not have happened during the actual war. I can't say for certain though, because my modern history is a touch rusty. In a first for the series, Cyberpilot allows players to really get stuck into the action through the power of virtual reality. You know, that bit of technology that's really easy to make games for and doesn't make my wallet cry. Sadly, this change in reality was part of what doomed Cyberpilot to its fate. Critics did not respond well to its controls, because said controls didn't respond well to, well, anything, really, making operating the various mechs feel clunky and uncoordinated, the very issues that VR was meant to eliminate. It also didn't help that the game had just 4 levels, which is an absolute travesty considering that it cost the best part of $20 when it was released, so in addition to being technically wonky, it was also terrible value for money. Furthermore, whilst the Wolfenstein series isn't exactly known for its storylines outside of the recent entries, as after all the games are mostly about blasting Nazis in their stupid Nazi faces, they usually offer a decent plot for players to sink their teeth into. Cyberpilot felt insultingly bare bones, and it was as if the series was so desperate to have a VR game under its belt that the devs didn't give a toss whether or not it was actually any good. 4 years on from Cyberpilot's release, and Wolfenstein fans still haven't gotten anything new, though maybe this means that the devs have just been working extra hard to make sure the next game is an improvement. Although, judging by the reception of the latest Arcane and Bethesda team-up, we're not holding our breath. Number 12. Beyond Castle Wolfenstein, 1984, PC. Original Wolfenstein developers Muse Software knew they had a hit on their hands with the first game in the series, and so decided to spend the next 3 years working on a follow-up. What did all that sweat and toil produce? Well, basically the first game again, but much, much worse. Beyond Castle Wolfenstein became available for the Apple II and Commodore 64 home computers in 1984 and carried over most of the stealth elements from its predecessor. It also came with the added bonus of a big old picture of Hitler on the front cover. Good luck explaining that one to your parents when it turned up in the post. Set in Germany during the pre-war years, the game sets players the challenge of infiltrating the dictator's secret bunker, placing a bomb by his meeting room, and then getting the hell out of there. Beyond Castle Wolfenstein is presented from a top-down perspective, similar to the first game, and allows players to traverse levels inside the titular fortress by keeping out of sight of those pesky guards. Oh, gotten yourself caught? Fear not, you can simply show your captors the correct pass or bribe them. It really is that easy. Even at the time, however, critics complained about the game's graphics, which they said had improved very little in the 3 years since the release of Castle Wolfenstein. It was also noted that once players had completed the game, there was very little point in returning to replay it, as the passes needed to get past the guard stayed the same on a new playthrough. Beyond Castle Wolfenstein might have been a fine 8-bit game in its own right, but it was coming off the back of an industry shifter. Castle Wolfenstein was a brilliant game, as you'll find out later on, so expectations for its sequel were, quite rightly, very high. Unfortunately, the follow-up failed to meet every single one of them, which is just about the worst thing it could have possibly done. Nice one, Beyond Castle Wolfenstein. You managed to make people angry at a game in which you can literally blow up Hitler. I hope you're proud of yourself. Number 11. Wolfenstein Youngblood, 2019. PS4, Xbox One, Switch, Stadia, and PC. Oh look, it's the other Wolfenstein game that was released in 2019, and it's the third from bottom on our list. That's not brilliant news, is it? Released on exactly the same day as our good friend Cyberpilot, Youngblood rather aptly centers around Jessie and Zofia, the daughters of series protagonist BJ Blazkowicz, who are living as happily as they can in a world ripped apart by war. But then, their dear old dad disappears. After discovering that their pops has travelled behind enemy lines and needs some help, it's up to the girls to put the skills he taught them into practice and go kick some Nazi bottom. Aw, isn't it nice when families do things together? As BJ was kind enough to sire a pair of twins, Youngblood can be played in co-op, which was very much appreciated by players, as when they found out how bad the game was, at least they didn't have to suffer alone, although the friend I was playing it with didn't want to play anymore, so I had to play it alone, so actually, there's no redeeming factor at all. Sorry, carry on. The problem with Youngblood was that it tried far too hard to take itself seriously. Whilst the Wolfenstein series does deal with some pretty harrowing subject matter at times, the overall premise, with its supernatural elements and alternative take on history, is rather bonkers. So when Youngblood replaced its outlandish characters and wild plot swerves with dull, dreary ones and an infuriatingly repetitive live service but not approach, players weren't best pleased. Youngblood might have sold well enough, but it failed to resonate with critics, some of whom praised the combat system in the game, but the majority of whom didn't enjoy the characterization of the twins, the tedious and tiresome game mechanics, and the frustrating level design. More concerningly, the game also drove away established fans of the series, as they complained that it wasn't Wolfenstein-y enough. The poor response to this title, combined with the somehow even worse reaction to Cyberpilot, might be the reason we haven't heard anything from the series in a little while. After surviving hordes of Nazi soldiers, giant fighting machines, and the evilest empire in the history of the world, imagine if Wolfenstein got killed off because of the actions of two teenage girls high-fiving in a lift. Doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Number 10. Wolfenstein, 2009. PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. One of the worst trends in gaming is when a long-running franchise releases a new game that simply shares its name with the series it's a part of. Imagine if, after all these years, the next title set in the Mushroom Kingdom featuring two plumbers in overalls was just called Mario. There'd be crowds outside the Nintendo headquarters with pitchforks and flaming torches. Doom, we're looking at you. The Wolfenstein series became guilty of this offense in 2009, 28 years after the original game came out, when Raven Software and Activision released Wolfenstein. At least this was the first title to simply be called Wolfenstein, which I suppose we should be somewhat grateful for. God of War. Playable on PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, this story pits Agent Blazkowicz against those naughty goose steppers once again as they try to locate some special crystals which will give them access to the Black Sun dimension. Now, I'm no expert on alternate dimensions, but I'm assuming that the bad guys don't want to go there because of its nice weather and delicious local cuisine. The Nazis' attempts to dig up the magical rocks lead to many strange goings-on in the village above ground, spawning several weird and wonderful creatures for players to gawk at and then splatter all over the screen. Another positive is the wide variety of locations that you get to visit, ranging from taverns and hospitals to underground mines and even a zeppelin. This is very much a case of quantity over quality though, as there is very little in Wolfenstein to capture anybody's imagination. The shooting is dull, the missions are uninspired, and all that talk about multiple locations falls apart when you realise that they're all basically just copies of one another with a different skin, and few real differences between any of them. Wolfenstein is, at its core, a brainless shoot-'em-up with lots of nice opportunities for players to kill members of a horrible organisation, but beyond that, there really isn't enough to justify this game carrying the name of such a legendary franchise. And when that's the only name it's got, that's a big problem. Number 9. Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, 2003. PC. For 9 long years, Wolfenstein fans were left with nowhere to kill Nazis in increasingly violent ways but their imaginations, and the series didn't publish a title between 1992 and 2001. We'll get to that 2001 game in a little while, but there was supposed to be an expansion pack released for it, which, for various reasons, never saw the light of day. 2 years later, however, developer Splash Damage thought, let's just release it anyway in free-to-play online multiplayer form and see what happens. This was Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, an FPS experience designed to bring people together by letting them annihilate each other. Enemy Territory's gameplay was incredibly simple. Players split off into 2 teams, the Axis and the Allies, and attempted to complete various mission objectives across 6 different maps, all of which were inspired by real-life World War II battle locations. Wow, I'm learning whilst I shoot my friends in the face. This is a dream come true. There was a lot to like about Enemy Territory, especially when you consider that online gaming was nowhere near as prevalent in 2003 as it is today, as it offered an experience that few others did at the time. It kept a lot of the fun parts of existing Wolfenstein multiplayer modes, but opened them up to a much wider player base as access to reliable internet speeds were becoming more and more widespread. However, as good of a multiplayer experience as Enemy Territory was, that's all it was, since there was nothing else to do except run around, kill all your enemies, and then start all over again. This was fine to begin with, but things soon got repetitive. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't held in high regard at the time, nor that it isn't fondly remembered by players today, as was shown when Enemy Territory made its grand return on Steam in 2022. Hallelujah! Also, if you like the sound of this game but aren't a Wolfenstein fan, Splash Damage released a follow-up called Enemy Territory Quake Wars in 2007 based on the popular FPS series Quake. Although, if you're not a fan of Wolfenstein, why are you still watching? Do stick around though, we'd appreciate the views. Number 8. Spear of Destiny, 1992. PC. What's this? A second unconventional entry in a row, aren't we naughty? Wolfenstein 3D, which we'll get to much later, was released in 2 sets of 3 episodes via shareware, the name given to open source software designed to be shared by the owner for either a small fee or nothing at all. Nothing at all. Nothing at all. That game was wildly successful, something that developers id Software wanted to capitalize on by expanding its world through the creation of a brand new episode. This is how players ended up with Spear of Destiny, which was published by FormGen and released in September of 1992. Due to the standalone prequel nature of the story, plus the fact that it got its own individual release, we feel that it qualifies for its own spot on this list, which is convenient because it's a lot of fun to talk about. BJ is out to recover the titular spear, which gained supernatural abilities when it was used to pierce the side of Jesus' body as he was being crucified. Yes, it's that one! Unfortunately for humanity, this mythical weapon has fallen into the Nazis' grubby little mitts, and if used incorrectly, the spear could open a portal to a demonic world and spell disaster for the good guys. The game wasn't perfect by any stretch, as some critics found the map designs to be too complex and the overall experience too similar to Wolfenstein 3D, but others disagreed and didn't care about this, as that game was excellent, and so was this new episode. It would also be unfair to just call this a 3D clone, as the addition of new enemy types was widely praised, and its story continued to build on the intriguing world of magical Nazis that was set up in the main installment. Ultimately, there just isn't enough of Spear of Destiny for it to rank any higher on this list, but considering that it was designed as a tack onto an existing game and that it's performed better than several other full titles, I think it deserves a hearty pat on the back. Although you shouldn't pat a spear too hard, you might impale yourself on, the pointy bit. Peter?
Number 7. Wolfenstein RPG, 2009, mobile. Wolfenstein RPG, which was first released back in 2008, is, would you believe it, a role-playing game. What will they think of next? It's also decidedly different from any other game in the franchise for a number of different reasons. Instead of hunting demon-summoning Nazis or trying to blow up Hitler, this time BJ is trapped in a castle and has to escape from a bunch of flaming zombie skeletons. Remind me again which part of World War II they were in? Rather than the chaotic frenzy of most of its forebears, or the bland seriousness we'd get with the likes of Young Blood, RPG is instead openly silly, embracing the wackier elements that the series has given us over the years. The game is packed full of strange environments, unique enemies, and stupid humour, all of which make it a delightful excursion from the usual Wolfenstein Wolfenstein Bloodshed. There's still some good old-fashioned violence, naturally, but equally there's a minigame where you could get points by kicking a chicken at a scoreboard, which is perhaps the greatest thing humanity has ever achieved. Wolfenstein RPG performed very well with critics, despite the fact that it was only available on mobile phones, which is usually a death sentence for a video game. The first-person turn-based gameplay was well liked, as was the sound design, the visuals, and the variety of different ways to play the game. It was also noted how close this game felt to a full Wolfenstein experience, even though it was designed to be played mostly on trains, buses, and the toilet. As a one-off experiment, we cannot fault the efforts of the team behind this wonderful oddity. Unfortunately though, we just couldn't bring ourselves to put Wolfenstein RPG any higher than 7th place, as by their very nature, mobile games cannot compete with a fully fleshed out home console experience, so this one will just have to settle for mid-table. If the title were ever to make the leap to consoles or PC, then perhaps we'd rethink its ranking. But any game that's designed to be played whilst doing your plops is never going to be as ambitious as those that you don't play with your trousers round your ankles. Maybe. Depends on your home setup, I suppose. Number 6. Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, 2015, PS4, Xbox One, and PC. 4 years before Youngblood was released and made everyone contemplate sticking their hand in the toaster just to feel something, Wolfenstein: The Old Blood did a much better job of being a Wolfenstein game, seriously decreasing the probability of a kitchen appliance-based accident. Released on PS4, Xbox One, and PC, The Old Blood follows our boy BJ as he once again tangos with his greatest foes, only this time they've got gigantic robots in the shape of dogs on their side. Nazi dogs? Oh, must be part of the K9 unit. As in N-E-I-N. Never mind, I'll see myself out. After the mechanical mutts do a number on his partner, Richard Wesley, BJ flees to a local village where he discovers that the baddies are attempting to excavate an underground cavern filled with special occult knowledge. Oh great, that's the last thing we need. Nazis with killer robot dogs and dark magic. Could this day get any worse? Critics were on the whole happy with the Old Blood's performance, praising the game's gripping gun battles, varied location designs, combination of stealth and action, vast selection of weapons, and the story's overall pacing. That's a lot of praise, but this game isn't number 1, so you've probably worked out that it wasn't without fault. The plot was rightfully labelled as thinner than a sheet of rice paper on a diet, and some felt as though the game focused too much on grisly visuals instead of creating deeper lore and a more fleshed out world. Blasting one of history's great evils to smithereens is one thing, but there has to be more to a game than just that, you know? The title was also deemed to be fan service, as some felt that it focused too much on recapturing the glory of the series' past rather than pushing it to new heights, running the risk of turning a franchise stale over time. Despite all this though, The Old Blood stands as an example of why there was so much love for Wolfenstein over 3 decades after the release of the first game. The balance may have been a little off, but it still presented players with an experience that was exciting, bloody, funny, and intriguing all at once. Number 5. Wolfenstein: The New Order, 2014, PS4, Xbox One, PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. 5 years after the self-titled Wolfenstein game made everyone feel a bit sick, the series roared back into life with the much better Wolfenstein: The New Order. Not only was BJ back for this new adventure, but so was his nemesis from the previous game, SS officer Wilhelm Death's Head Strasser, who, with a name like that, was always going to turn out evil. I mean, he wasn't going to join the hospitality industry, was he? Imagine being served in a restaurant by a man named Death's Head. Not even the vegetables would be safe. Following an escape from a Nazi experimentation lab, Blazkowicz falls into a coma and is kept in a psychiatric ward until the year 1960. After his little enforced nap, BJ wakes up to find that things have gone very wrong indeed. See, this Wolfenstein game is actually set in the aftermath of World War II, only with one minor difference from how things played out in reality. This time, the Nazis won! Wait, that's not minor. That's not minor at all. Now living in this strange new world, players must guide BJ through a Nazi-occupied land to seek his revenge and start to try and put things right. Gameplay-wise, the New Order expanded on the work done by Wolfenstein 09 by enhancing its gunfights to be a lot more thrilling. Critics were very happy with these changes, including one from Videogamer.com who called the gunplay solid, and that man's name was... No, it can't be. The one and only Simon Miller? Well, if the game's alright with him, then it's alright with me. And that's okay. Unless it isn't, in which case, that's fine. Praise was also handed out to the game's engaging story, fleshed out characters, and top quality voice acting from Brian Bloom as BJ and Dwight Schultz as Strasser. The alternative history aspect of the game was singled out as a nice touch as well, presumably because the concept hadn't yet been done to death by every single form of media. Across the critical landscape, the New Order scored ever so slightly higher than its spiritual sibling, the Old Blood, but the triumphs of both games announced to the world that the Wolfenstein series was now back in business after a few years on the rocks, mainly thanks to the very positive endorsement of Simon Miller, I assume. Number 4. Return to Castle Wolfenstein, 2001, PS2, Xbox 360, and PC. The 9 years between 1992 and 2001 marked the longest gap between releases in Wolfenstein's history, but that time was clearly well spent, as Return to Castle Wolfenstein was a big old success. Releasing on PS2, Xbox, and PC, the game served as something of a reboot for the bloodthirsty franchise and was overseen by Grey Matter Studios, the team behind the multi-award-winning emotional roller coaster that was Redneck Deer Hunting. What? I'm sure it was emotional if you're a redneck. Or a deer. Thankfully, Grey Matter did a lot better with the Wolfenstein license, creating a narrative in which BJ and a British spy called Agent 1 work together to clean up after the Nazis' paranormal division upon the accidental release of a load of ancient curses into the world. Seriously, what are they like, the scamps? This entry was the furthest the series had gone down the supernatural path up to that point, which delighted fans of the more outlandish aspects of the franchise. It also took players all over the world, from the deserts of Egypt and an Austrian castle to the far-off mythical land of Norway. But whilst the story portion of the game is quite fun, it's the multiplayer element of Return to Castle Wolfenstein that puts it this far up the list. Rather than just dumping a load of fizzy drink-fueled teenagers into a map and telling them to shoot each other, this game offered a more structured multiplayer experience, as participants were split into 2 teams and given specific objectives to achieve. This ramped up the level of communication needed between teammates and created a richly rewarding group adventure. There were unintended side effects, however, as the press latched onto the fact that players could choose to play as the Nazis, which did not paint executive producers id Software in the best light. With that said though, these were the people who made Doom, so they were very much used to scandal at this point. While some fans of first-person shooters are purely in it for the plot, a strong multiplayer mode is essential for this type of game's longevity, and Return to Castle Wolfenstein absolutely nailed that last part, even if it was a teensy bit controversial. Number 3. Castle Wolfenstein, 1981, PC. It speaks volumes to the quality of the original Wolfenstein game that it's so far up this list, despite the fact that it saw its initial release all the way back in 1981. Of course, you could also take that to mean that the rest of the series has been bad, but we're optimists here at TripleJump Towers, and we're choosing to ignore you. Developed and published by Muse Software and available on a variety of primitive home computers, Castle Wolfenstein was played from a top-down perspective as players traverse the titular fortress as an unnamed Allied spy, no, not Mr. Blazkowicz, who'd gone and gotten himself captured. Clearly he hadn't read the World War II spy handbook, because that's like the first thing they tell you not to do. After stumbling upon a fellow prisoner who just so happens to have some weapons handy, it's up to the player to fight off the guards, steal some secret battle plans, and escape the castle before the timer runs out. Now, whilst this all seems incredibly basic by modern standards, Castle Wolfenstein was practically considered witchcraft when it first came out. Players had the choice of whether to kill the various Nazis they came across, which would waste their limited ammunition, or to run the risk of threatening them in the hope they'd surrender, a revolutionary game mechanic at the time. This was also one of the very first games to incorporate stealth, which would go on to be adopted and iterated upon by countless games and franchises in the coming decades. Castle Wolfenstein had sold a whopping 50,000 units by 1983, which may not sound like much when popular games today sell by the millions, but most games were lucky to shift even 50 copies during the early 80s. Whilst modern gamers might find Castle Wolfenstein's controls and content to be a bit caveman, it's important to remember that these elements were revolutionary back in the day, and modern gaming would look very different if they'd never existed. Wolfenstein has come such a long way since its pixelated 2D debut that it's barely recognisable anymore, but the legacy of the first ever installment proves that you should always respect your elders. Unless those elders are Nazis, in which case threaten those elders and hope that they surrender. Number 2. Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, 2017. PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. Despite being called Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus was not the second game in the Wolfenstein series, nor was it the immediate sequel to the game just called Wolfenstein that we talked about earlier. Clearly, the folks at Machine Games and Bethesda did this to just make our lives a little bit harder. Releasing in 2017, The New Colossus serves as a direct sequel to The New Order, and so is set in the same universe where the bad guys won the Second World War. If we need to remind you who the bad guys were in that conflict, then you may be in need of some serious help. After the events of New Order, BJ once again falls into a coma, which really can't be good for him, waking up on a commandeered U-boat after about 5 months this time, instead of over a decade. After blasting some baddies from his wheelchair, he gets back on his feet and is tasked with the ultra-patriotic mission of liberating America from the grip of those damn Nazis. All together now, God save our gracious America, long live... That's how the US national anthem goes, isn't it? Before this title was even released, it earned some considerable hype following a prominent appearance at E3. E3, remember that? And was at risk of falling victim to the dreaded hype train. Thankfully for the team behind it and the players who went out and bought it, this train did not fly off its tracks and reached its intended destination of Great Game City. Does that metaphor work? The New Colossus entered the bestseller charts around the world, as players were drawn in by its exciting level design, innovative weapon selection, and satisfying fighting mechanics, which all made it feel exactly like a Wolfenstein game should feel, a playable, big-budget action movie. It also scooped a load of prizes, including Best Action Game at the 2017 Game Awards, and several publications included it in their roundups of the best games of the year. The New Colossus felt like the culmination of everything the series had been building to, and could well have been the best Wolfenstein game ever made, were it not for a certain groundbreaking release some 25 years earlier. Ben?
Number 1. Wolfenstein 3D, 1992, PC. Hardcore Wolfenstein fans, or fans of first-person shooters in general, will have probably guessed that 1992's Wolfenstein 3D was going to be at the top of this list, because when something is considered to be amongst the greatest video games ever made, you can't really get away with holding it back. 8 years after the release of Beyond Castle Wolfenstein, and with new developers id Software at the helm, Wolfenstein 3D began so many of the traditions that fans would come to cherish about the franchise, such as introducing BJ Blazkowicz as the hero, making a shift from stealth to out-and-out action, and bringing the series to 3D. obviously.
Across its 6 episodes, the game follows Agent Blazkowicz as he gets captured by his enemies, escapes their clutches, discovers their evil plan to conquer the world using an army of the undead, and battles Adolf Hitler in a flipping supersuit. No wonder people love this game. Not only was Wolfenstein 3D the first FPS in the series, it was one of the first games in the entire genre to become massively popular, and is widely credited with catapulting this style into the mainstream, which is probably really good or possibly bad depending on your tolerance levels towards stinky COD boys. id Software released Doom just 1 year later, so it's also not a stretch to imagine that this game played a role in the shaping of that little-known title as well.
A huge moneymaker, a revolutionary gameplay experience, and one of the key releases in the history of one of gaming's most important subgenres, Wolfenstein 3D has more than earned its stellar reputation. Without it, we probably wouldn't be here talking about the Wolfenstein series today, as it may well have died a death after just 2 entries.
Pretty much everything on this list, as well as countless other video games, owe a debt to Wolfenstein 3D, which is why we knew right from the very start that it was heading to the number 1 spot. Now, where's my copy? I've suddenly developed an overwhelming urge to shoot Mecha Hitler.